Welcome to The Trenches. I'm your host, Rob McCallum. Imagine a world where you get to experiment with your craft, play with toys, have passion fuel your every move, and leave a legacy strong enough that it resonates with millions of people around the globe. This is the world of Tim Clarke. From working with Jim Henson and the folks at The Muppet Show, Sesame Street, The Dark Crystal, and Fraggle Rock, straight out of college, to creating the Sectaurs toy line and the wonderfully grotesque Boglin toys, Tim has been playing his entire life and shows no signs of slowing down. I've been hounding Tim to come on the show for about 3 months now, and he finally agreed. So bear with us, though, on some of the audio early on as a crazy thunderstorm was wreaking havoc with his mic in the first part. And with that, I'll leave you to it. Here's my conversation with Mr. Tim Clarke. Tim, how are you doing, man?
I'm well, and you?
Pretty good. One of the emails that you sent me in getting ready for this jumped out at me because it said, you do realize this is costing us $2,000 a minute, which was in reference to the only thing that's ever stressed you out.
Exactly.
So nobody knows necessarily where that might come from. So why don't you tell them what the scenario of that is?
The first day of shooting on the Dark Crystal.
No big deal, first of all.
Right. And the Mystic scene was the very first scene shot of the Mystic Valley. And the second unit director came over, and I was sitting there with all the Mystics lined up. The puppeteers were in the costumes, and but they had their the head and neck piece was separate, and they were sitting there waiting with those parts off and their arms out, and they were lined up, and I was sitting there eating a sausage and egg sandwich for my breakfast. And it bothered him that I was, one, eating my breakfast and that I was relaxed. Now, granted, this was the first movie he had ever done, and I had already worked on Sesame Street, and so where I hadn't been working on a movie, I knew what it was like to be on set. And he came over to me, and he was really, like wired. And he said to me, "Are you guys ready? Are you guys ready?" And I said, "Yes, we're ready to go on. We're just eating our breakfast, and as soon as you guys need us, we'll be on set." And he said, "Are you sure, Tim? Are you sure you're ready? Because you do realize this is costing us $2,000 a minute." I said, okay, don't worry. We're all set. And of course, I got all the Mystics onto the set. And all the dressers got them into their costumes. They all got in place. And they said, "Okay, 45-minute break. We need to reset the lights." Which is always, it's always hurry up and rush. Right?
Yeah, hurry up and wait a little bit. Yeah, we're gonna cover a bunch of the stuff that you've worked on through your whole career, and I'm fascinated. Like, you're the kind of one of the people that definitely got me to where I am today as a storyteller and as a filmmaker, and like my hobbies and passion. But what would you say that it is that you do more than anything? If you could bundle down your skills into one kind of job title, whether it's traditional or something that you've made up, what would it be?
I'm a designer of many things, but mostly toys and puppets and kayaks and furniture and sculptor. I guess that's it in a nutshell.
Sure. And what was it in your youth, you think, or growing up, that led you to kind of really have a fascination to working with your hands and understanding design and making that leap into that profession of yours?
My parents didn't discourage me. They were very supportive since my brother is an illustrator and my sister is a sculptor, painter, potter, ceramicist. So all three of us are creative. My mom was very creative, but she was discouraged by her mother from doing anything creative. And so she was exactly the opposite. And I was very fortunate in that my uncle worked for a printing company, and he always had end runs of paper. So as kids, we had an endless supply of paper to draw. But most of it, I would say it was because my parents weren't afraid to encourage us to be creative people.
Do you remember any key moments growing up where you started creating something, whether it was a drawing or something that maybe you worked on with your siblings or even with your parents, where you're like, yes, this is what I want to keep doing, because you just couldn't stop doing it? Was there like those key moments growing up for you?
To tell you the truth, I don't remember any time that I wasn't being creative. I mean, I knew from a very young age that I excelled in making things. Even when I was in grade school, I remember making a Santa Claus at Christmas out of cardboard tubes and balls, and painting it, and that my art teacher was surprised at how good it was. And I can remember as a young kid building a tank, a camouflage tank in my backyard out of refrigerator boxes and a hat box and a cardboard tube we got from a carpet store up the road. So I was always building and creating things. I remember in the wintertime making really elaborate tunnels in the snow. My brother and I would create, and we would run rubber balls down through the tunnels. And we were figuring out constantly how we could, get the ball to move through space.
Nowadays, I mean, kids, they're really dealing with a lot of electronics in the digital age, and being able to manipulate, stuff in software, it gets them to stand out. And you would almost think that maybe a kid with your skill set growing up today might be kind of a bit of an outcast, because it's an untangible world. We're not touching anything that's real. We're manipulating the intangible, the digital, for the most part, when we're doing a lot of creativity. What was it like for you growing up? Were you the only kid in the class doing stuff with your hands? Were you working with other kids?
I wouldn't say I was the only kid, but it was definitely my major focus. Even, through all of school, I ended up graduating from high school with more art credits than anybody in the history of the school. And it got to the point when I got into my senior year, I had gone through every art class I could possibly take. And I said to the art teacher, next year, when I was in 11th grade, I said, next year, you're going to have to create some new classes, because I've done every single one and I don't want to stop working in my senior year. So she did. She was a great teacher. She was Mrs. Poliero was my art teacher in high school. She was just a brilliant teacher, and very much encouraged me. It was great to see her, since I graduated a long time ago, but seeing her at high school reunions and getting to tell her what a great influence she was.
What leads you from those days doing all the art credits in high school to eventually working with someone like Jim Henson on Sesame Street and The Muppet Show?
Well, I went to Pratt, and when I got to Pratt, I can't remember exactly in what year I was at Pratt. I don't think it was freshman year, but sophomore year, I found out that Kermit Love was teaching there. Kermit was the guy who designed Big Bird and Snuffleupagus, and he taught a class in puppetry at Pratt, and it was you were given seniority to take the class if you were higher up, if you were either a junior or a senior, and if you were a theater major at Pratt. So I was an art ed major, and I didn't get to take Kermit's class until the last semester of my senior year. And I was very lucky because my mother never stopped me from doing creative things. And I remember when I was in high school asking her if she would teach me how to sew. She never hesitated. She said, "Yeah, sure, I'll show you," and I started making my own shirts. And so when I took the puppetry class, the fact that I was male and I knew how to sew, Kermit was amazed. He was very surprised. And so one of the first things I made was a crab out of fabric and plaster bandage and ping pong balls. And I put the ping pong balls on my thumbs, and the rest of my fingers were the crab's legs, which I put extensions on. And then I built a hard shell out of the plaster bandage. And that was the first thing I made. And I brought it in, and he was just like, he was amazed. One, he said, because you've made a puppet, but you've made it using your hands in a way that's totally unique. And when I think about it now, that very much influenced how I thought about puppetry after that. Is like, how can you use your hands and your body in a different way?
And that's definitely a through line through a lot of the other stuff you did in your career too.
Yeah, because Sectaurs came out of that.
Yeah,
is figuring out a way to use your hands. And Sectaurs, the fly puppet that I made to go to a Halloween party was made before I started working at Muppets. I made that while I was working at Kermit's studio. So, it's like when there was downtime in the studio, I would just play around with the materials and making things. So I had made that fly puppet, and that was the basis of what Sectaurs became.
Well, you're speaking my language across the board. I'm a huge Jim Henson fan. One of the first documentaries I did in school was a 30-minute doc on Henson and building puppets and everything he'd done in his career. And I'm a huge toy fan. One of the other guests that we had on the show was Anton Clarke Renault, who did the only book on the history of Coleco. And of course, we get into Sectaurs as well, talking about that. And since you brought it up, tell me all about Sectaurs. I mean, we can jump back to some of the other, Henson-related properties, but you brought it up, so I got to ask because I love it, and it's always on the list of a lot of, properties that we need this rebooted again because it was unique, the designs were great, and it was fun. It was fun, man.
While I was working at Muppets, which was probably 5 years after I had created that fly puppet, we were finishing up on the first season of Fraggle Rock, and I went to Jim and I said, we're doing such innovative things when it comes to puppetry, and it doesn't get applied to the toys that are made for kids. It's like a lot of the stuff that was based on Muppet licenses where, like they would make a Big Bird ride-on vehicle, but it would just be stickered with Big Bird images on it or slightly adapted to make it, like putting his face on the front of the big wheel. And I said, Jim, it's like if we were to design that at Muppets, we would make it so that the kid put his feet in legs that look like Big Bird's feet and legs, and that he was, riding around, and feel like he's Big Bird, Mm-hmm. And Jim said to me, Tim, it's a wonderful idea. I just don't want to do it. Meaning, I was trying to convince him to do a design studio at Muppets. And after Fraggle Rock was finished, they had a glut of puppet designers and builders. And they came to some of us and said, we're going to put you on freelance because we can't keep everybody on staff. And so when I left working full-time for Muppets, I started thinking about designing and building toys. I went to Toy Fair in February. I think that was probably 82. I had been trying to get in to see different toy companies, but the toy companies are very paranoid about seeing new designers and or inventors. And only people who would see me was Hasbro, and that was because I had sculpted the toys for Hasbro for Dark Crystal. So, but everybody else, it was forget it. It was impossible. And I went to Toy Fair and I picked up Toy Fair magazine, and I saw at the back an ad for Seven Towns, which was a toy designer's representative or agent. And I called them up and I said, it's like I've been doing a lot of different toy designs and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, okay, that's fine. But, we really don't see people, that we don't know. I was like, oh my gosh, not again,
Yeah.
And then I said to him, well, I've been working at Muppets for the last, 6 years, 5 or 6 years. And I said, and I have all these concepts. And he said, wait, you worked at Muppets? And I said, yes. He said, oh, in that case, just come in. So I went in and I met originally with Art Taylor, who represented Seven Towns in New York. And then he had me meet with the other agent at Seven Towns in New York, which was Larry Mass. And I showed him, at some point, the fly puppet that I had been working on, or I had worked on, several years ago. And I pulled it out of the bag and I put it on, and he went, "Oh, that's really cool." He said, we could put an action figure on the back of that and sell it as an action, as a thing for an action figure line. And at that time I was working with Maureen Trotto, and Maureen and I were doing a lot of specialty work for television commercials, props, and special effects. And so Maureen and I started working on developing Sectaurs as an action figure. From there, the following year, it was sold to Coleco as a toy property, much to everybody's amazement.
Yeah, well, Coleco was really starting to diversify after the ColecoVision, and then they started getting to the home computer market, and they tried to basically do everything they could through the 80s. It seemed to kind of regain some of the success that they found throughout the 60s and 70s. So that was really interesting to see that development.
I have to say, most of Coleco's money came from Cabbage Patch. That was their biggest earner. And it'll be interesting to hear what you learned about Coleco, because for me, it was great to do Sectaurs, but Coleco was a probably really badly managed company, one of the worst I think I've ever had to deal with. And I think it led to their demise.
That's essentially the tale of the 80s from what I read in the book and talked to my friend about. He said basically in the 80s, they tried to resuscitate everything based on Cabbage Patch because they put way too much into the Coleco Atom. It kind of bankrupted the company, and they were trying for anything that might bring them out of it, with action figures being huge, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Masters of the Universe, here comes Sectaurs. Can we make that work? Didn't really work that much.
I mean, Atom Computers was their biggest disaster and what sunk the company. But also their management style was bizarre, to say the least. Like when Maureen and I were working with them on Sectaurs, at one point I called the design department and was asking them about, I forget, one of the mechanisms in one of the toys, and the guy said, "Well, we didn't do that. Engineering did that." He said, "You're going to have to talk to engineering." And I said, "Okay, fine." So he gave me the name of the guy, the head of engineering, and I called him, and I said, it's like, I think you could make this work in a more efficient manner and blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, wait, which product are you talking about? And I told him, and he said, I don't know. I don't think we worked on that piece. He said, I think design worked on that. And I said, well, I just talked to the guys in design. They said to talk to you. He said, well, we don't really talk to the guys in design. And I said, what? He said, well, we compete with the guys in design. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we come up with concepts and we engineer things, and they come up with concepts and they design things, and then we see whose is better, and whoever's better gets their piece done. And I said, so you don't cooperate with each other to make product? And he said, no, we don't talk at all. And I was like, this is, like, think to him, I got off the phone. I said, this is just crazy. So the Greenberg brothers had the design department and the engineering department working against each other, not with each other.
The left hand and the right hand don't know what they're doing.
Right. So that was, like, you look at why Atom computers didn't work.
Yeah.
I mean, like, think about it. If you had Macintosh and the engineering and the design department weren't working together, I mean, the thing wouldn't function? Which is exactly what happened. Was they were selling computers that didn't work, and they were getting returned, and they lost their shirts.
You got to feel bad for marketing, because who do they listen to about what to promote if each side's telling them something differently?
Yeah. So that was one problem. Then I also, halfway through the point of launching Sectaurs, Maureen and I were out in California working on a stop-motion animation movie of Sectaurs with live actors and stop-motion insects and large insects for close-up shots. And we were probably a good 3 months into it, and we got called back to Connecticut. And we went to meet with the people at Coleco, and they said, well, even though Universal had agreed to put up half the film budget, Coleco said, we're not going forward with the movie. So you guys you're not going back. And we were like, oh, okay, And then the head of inventor relations said to me, and we're going to be doing Rambo action figures. And he said, what do you think about that? I said, I think it's probably a really bad idea. And I said, it has nothing to do with that it's competing against Sectaurs. It's that you're going to be trying to sell Vietnam War toys to the biggest pacifist generation in the history of the United States. And I said, G.I. Joe has become the rescue squad. They're not even selling G.I. Joe as a war toy or, an army toy or however you describe it. I said, what makes you think that this generation who's having kids now who were protesting against the Vietnam War are going to buy Rambo toys for their kids? I said, it's not going to happen. And he said, but there's going to be a Saturday morning cartoon. I said, they're not going to let their kids watch that cartoon, Mm-hmm. And sure enough, Rambo toys came out, and they spent hundreds of $1,000s on tooling and marketing it and promoting it. And, it went totally south. They're like zip sales. And so that was probably another, addition to the nail in the coffin of Coleco.
So what is it about toys for you? I mean, if you're playing with toys in the mid to late 70s and you're starting to design this fly puppet, and you also got to kind of do, like you said, the pre-sculpt for Hasbro and the Dark Crystal line that eventually didn't come out because they didn't think the movie was too scary and they didn't think it would appeal. What is it about toys, and when did it really hit you that toys are the answer? That's what I want to do. What speaks to you about medium, if you will.
The same thing as what I was talking to you about when I started working with Kermit was thinking about how you interact with materials and how you interact with using your hands, and just combining a lot of toy design is combining things that people never thought about mixing together, for kids to play with. I remember when Maureen and I were presenting Sectaurs to Coleco, they said, well, like we did a big, kind of spider hand puppet with fur fabric. And they said, but boys don't play with plush. And I said, if it's gross, they will. If it does if it's horrible and looks evil, of course they'll play with it because it's different, So I'm pretty sure that Sectaurs was probably the first time hard plastic and plush fabric was combined to create a toy. And of course that comes out of working with materials at Muppets, where we were constantly combining materials that people wouldn't necessarily put together.
Did you try to push for some of that interaction when you were doing the Dark Crystal stuff? Because, I mean, if people look at those prototype figures, they're pretty much, standard plastic sculpted, maquettes almost.
Oh, those the pieces that were done for Hasbro were very limited. Hasbro wanted everything to come out of a 2-part mold.
Okay.
So then you're very limited on having texture or detail because they didn't want any undercuts. They wanted everything to be as simplified as possible, which was a real challenge. And, like some of the guys at Hasbro were very good at showing me how to sculpt towards a parting line and how to turn something on an angle so that you can still get detail into something, but not be limited in how it, appears. So, I learned a lot of things, but I recently, when Reaction started to, decided to redo the line,
which I own in its entirety, by the way, because you have to.
Good. And Ben at Funko, I think we met through the internet originally, or we met at Toy Fair, and he was asking me about the original pieces and whether they should do them exact. And I said, no, I said, I really think you should push them, as far as you can, because the sculpts for Hasbro were so limited in, what they look like.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, it really wasn't in the toy business. Almost everything was done out of 2-part molds until McFarlane Toys came out with these really detailed and ornate pieces.
Yeah.
Or multiple mold pieces, and proved that people would actually spend the money to get better quality.
Yeah, welcome to the adult collectors and the Four Horsemen and all those guys.
Exactly. So, yeah, the industry keeps changing. Some of it stays the same, but it keeps changing, and it's always fascinating to see what people do.
Yeah, I would love to see some interactive Dark Crystal type stuff. I mean, you look at Landstriders and Mystics. I mean, that's just begging for a hand kind of puppet to dance around on a table with, right? Just galloping along. Maybe that's just me, but
I have been talking with a company about that, so who knows? We'll see.
All right, cross the fingers.
In the toy industry, everything is pie in the sky till it actually gets to the marketplace and people actually buy it.
So you know what it's like to be a filmmaker then too.
Yes. Yeah, it's the same. It's all pie in the sky all the time.
So from Sectaurs, not long after you start working on Boglins, another hand in toy creation, which is cool. How did Boglins come up? And there's a few creators that are listed online. You're one of 3 in terms of who's actually the creators of Boglins. Walk me through that story, because these are obviously fondly remembered, especially by like, I don't want to say like the horror group of toys, but like, that kind of gross, fun, disgusting looking toys that were great, that kind of garbage pail kind of like boy like stuff.
Maureen and I actually had done 2 different, one, my work on Dark Crystal and working with foam latex was a major influence in Boglins. And wanting to do, as I said when I was at Muppets or at Henson, wanting to take those techniques and expand it into toy properties. And there was a company in England called Bendy that did foam latex characters, which not very many companies worked in foam latex because the material itself is difficult to manage, and it also doesn't last. It's, shelf life is not great.
Yeah.
Because it's...
Well, sunlight like deteriorates it, right?
Right. Well, yeah. Ultraviolet just rots it very quickly. So, Maureen and I had done a commercial for Banaka where we had done a pizza head, which was a guy sitting on a stoop wearing had a face that looked like pizza, implying that he had pizza breath. And he's looking at a girl as she walks by, and she looks over at him and sees that he has a pizza head and just like shakes her head and keeps walking. And then he sprays Banaka in his mouth. So it was a foam latex pizza with eyes that tracked left to right to watch the girl, and then a mouth that opened and closed. And then we also worked on a Lanacane commercial where we had done a foam latex witch who was the Wicked Itch. And we had these things in our studio, and, it's like at some point we had a meeting with Seven Towns, and they came to the studio, and Larry was looking at the stuff, and he said, oh, it'd be great to do something like this. And I said, yeah, that's what I've been, that's what I've been talking about, is doing something out of foam latex. So then I went back after that meeting and started sculpting up the first of the large Boglins. And I made an eye mechanism for it so that the eyes would track left and right. And I made also a mechanism for his hand so he could grab things, and it was controlled by a lever in his tail. In the end result, Mattel ended up doing the eye mechanism, but it was too costly to do the hand mechanism. And then Maureen and I sculpted the smaller versions of the Boglins, and it was presented to Coleco at first. And Coleco wanted to make it as a nemesis for Sectaurs. And we went up to see it, and they made this just like horrible version of Boglin. They did not get it at all. He had a neck and a body, and the neck was like a dryer hose, and it was just like, it was truly an abomination. It was awful. And Maureen and I we looked at it, we was like, what the hell is this? It's like, it was nothing like the original Boglins. And we were really disappointed, but then later on Coleco dropped it because they were dropping Sectaurs. So Boglins came back to us, And at that point, Larry Mast took Boglins to Mattel. And Mattel got it right away. As an outside designer, Boglins, the dwarf Boglin looks probably the most like my original sculpt and prototype of any toy I've ever done. You know, it's just like, they got it right away. They were like, oh my God, this has been, you know, we've been looking at things like this in the movies for how many years? And, you know, it made total sense to them.
Sure, yeah. I mean, like, it's a no-brainer that, you know, Ghostbusters should have done it or something like that.
Well, but Boglins came out before Ghostbusters. But we had actually made Boglins because we had presented it to Coleco before it went to Mattel, which delayed it getting to Mattel by a year. We had made it way before even Gremlins came out. And once Gremlins came out, Maureen and I went to see Gremlins together, and we were just like, oh no, you know, like, because we had sold Boglins to Mattel, but that was like the February before Gremlins came out, and we knew that Boglins was going to be out in the marketplace, but then we saw Gremlins that summer, and we were like, oh crap, you know, that's it. You know, it's like, if they do Gremlin toys, then Boglins is just going to be looked at as being, you know, an add-on.
Yeah, or the knockoff, yeah.
A knockoff of Gremlins. Well, lucky for us, nobody had thought about doing Gremlins as a toy product. So they didn't come out for like another year after the movie. I mean, or months after the movie. So Boglins was launched that Christmas, you know, or that fall. I mean, I think the Gremlins movie came out in the middle of the summer, and Boglins came out that fall. So we hit the marketplace just at the right time. You know, we were very lucky.
So maybe take a step back, or at least kind of explain to people what it was maybe like the difference to work with, you know, the Muppet Group and like Jim Henson, and what it was like as a toy creator to work with a company like Mattel. Because like I said, having made a documentary on He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, I have an understanding of what Mattel was like in the 80s, but I really don't know, other than what I've read and, you know, different documentaries I've seen about working with Henson during, like, especially the heyday, you know, between like 76 and 86. So maybe kind of compare and contrast what that's like. Is it family versus very corporate? Is it very similar? What's it like for your role?
I started working for Kermit right out of college in 77, 78. And we were working on building a lot of puppets for Sesame Street in the foreign countries. So we built puppets for Mexico, we built puppets for Germany, we built puppets for Kuwait. And I was with Kermit for about a year. And Kermit had, you know, we did also, Kermit came from a theatrical background and designing costumes for dance companies, and usually more elaborate things than the norm. So we did the recreation of the Picasso costumes for Joffrey Ballet. We did a lot of work at New York City Ballet. We built like a 18-foot high marionette of for the ballet Don Quixote of like the giant that he fights, that he is supposed to be the windmill.
Yep.
So, but Kermit had work, and then, you know, he would have a month and a half where he had no work, so I would not be making any money. So it was like, no, and it wasn't making a lot of money to begin with. So I was getting a little frustrated, and I was going to go to him and ask him if I could get a recommendation to go and get a job at Muppets. And I went to see him at Pratt because he was teaching. And I waited till he finished his class, and I walked in, and he said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." And I said, "Why?" He said, "There's a new project starting up at Muppets that I think you'd be perfect for." And I was like, God, is he like reading my mind? I was like, what's going on here? And he said, yeah, he said, I'm going to set up an interview for you with Jim. And he said, I want you to take all the puppets you've been working on your own and show it to him. And I said, okay, great. So I think like the following Thursday, I had an interview with Jim, and I remember like taking this huge dragon puppet I had made and a monster puppet I had made called Mephistopheles that looked kind of like a Chinese dragon. And then some other smaller puppets, the crab puppet, the fly puppet, a bunch of other stuff. One of them was a sea anemone. And I just started pulling them out of these bags, like I couldn't figure out what to take them in. So I just piled everything in garbage bags. It's like, really classy too. But Jim didn't mind, it's like I just started he said, he met me, he said, well, show me what you have. And I just started pulling all the stuff. And when I pulled the dragon out, the dragon basically, my one hand was in his head. And then his back was, the hump in his back was my head. And his tail was my opposite hand.
Okay.
So it ran across the full length of my body. Now, so I'm 6 feet tall. And the dragon's head was probably about another 2 feet, and his tail was another 2 feet. So this thing is like 10 feet long. And I'm just moving it, like up and down like this. And he's just it's like after I pulled it out and I put it on, and he's just like, that's incredible. And, it's like, I was like, wow, I'm impressing Jim Henson. This is, like amazing.
Yeah, call it a day.
So then, I showed him all the different puppets I had made, and he said, okay. He said, when can you start? And I said, oh, I'll start tomorrow. It's like, and he said, no. He said, I have to talk to HR. And he said, why don't you come back next Tuesday? And so that's how I started working at Muppets. And I have to say, as a kid, it was never in my wildest dreams that I would end up working there. It's just, I always thought people who worked in television or movies or, theater, the only way that happened is if you knew somebody in the business. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really think of, of course, knowing Kermit is what got me there. But I never thought I would end up having that connection to get there.
What was it like working there? What was the attitude, the environment like day to day? And again, how does that differ like when you have to work with companies like Mattel? And I mean, you told us Coleco was completely mismanaged, and you're sitting there
right.
trying to do the math behind the scenes and read between the lines. Was Henson Associates just a little bit like more like a family, and it was really down to earth? Was it straightforward, or was it?
When I started working at Muppets, there was, I don't even think, maybe 25 people in the whole company.
Oh, wow.
So it was, it was just a really tight group of the people in the offices. And, we would have company meetings where everybody in the company was sitting around one big table, and it was very inclusive. I wish, in a way, it hadn't been my first job out of college, because I think I would have been not, more attentive to what was going on and more I probably would have pushed myself or been more aggressive about learning more, because I was so in awe of Jim and Frank and, some of the other puppet designers there, that I was a little bit intimidated, to say the least. It's like,
I bet.
Jim, the people in the workshop used to say Jim had a whim of iron, because you would be working on something, and he would usually, when I was working on Dark Crystal, he would come through the shop once a week, because at the same time he was still working on Muppet Show. And I'll never forget one time he came through, and I can't remember, I think I was sculpting one of the Mystics' heads, and he said to me, "Tim, what if you tried this and this?" And he was just describing different things. And I said, "Yeah, okay, Jim, okay." And, he walked away and he went to see other people, and I totally dismantled the head and started redoing it. And the following week he came in and he said, "Tim, what did you do?" I said, "Well, Jim, last time you were here, you said, what if you tried this and this and this?" And he said, "Yeah, I know, but I didn't mean that you should resculpt the whole thing." He said, "I was just throwing out ideas there." And I was like, well, it's like, when Jim Henson tells you to do something, you do it. It's
sure.
Like, you don't contemplate it as, just conceptual thinking, It's like, but it turned out, like after that, and then, he walked away, and I was like, I think it was Amy Van Gilder. I was talking to her about this. She said, "Oh, yeah, everybody has experienced Jim's whim of iron," And she laughed and she said, "Yeah," she said, "I can't tell you how many people as designers here have, Jim will come by and say, 'Oh, what if you tried this and this and this?' And then you spend the whole week changing something, and he comes back and goes, 'What did you do?' Like, wait, that's not what I meant," or, whatever, it's like, and I have to say, Jim was, I don't think I realized till later on how accepting and open-minded Jim was to the creative process. He just gave us so much freedom, and we could experiment with things and thinking about using our bodies and using our hands and doing different things. And, it's like he didn't worry about if it didn't work. It's like he was all for that experimentation. And it was wonderful. It was absolutely amazing. It's like, and he's lucky that he had the money that he could play that way,
So it's got to be pretty interesting. You said you kind of regret it being the first job out of high school, because you would have maybe appreciated more had you had like maybe a Coleco-like experience before it or something, because you're like, "Oh, finally I'm home." But you must have been able to kind of still pull something from that and carry all the way through you, like to where your career is now. What is that one thing you think you learned while working with Muppets and guys like Jim Henson and Frank Oz and Kermit Love? And
just the importance of being passionate about what you're doing, and believing in a concept or a dream or an inventive process, and putting it out there. And I still do that to this day. I'm still coming up with new concepts and ideas and playing around with the way that I interact with materials and trying new materials. And I've been working on relaunching Boglins. And, I don't know whether it's going to end up going to a big company or if I'm going to just keep doing, things on my own. But I was trying to find a material that I could actually make Boglins out of, that I could do in my own studio.
Sure.
So that I can play around with character development and just make them. And foam latex isn't practical. It's very temperamental, and it stinks. It's like it smells horribly when you're working with it. Silicone is too expensive, and it doesn't have the same feel as the Boglins were made out of. So I just started experimenting with lots and lots of different materials, and I actually more recently have been working with one company that produces plastics, and I found a material that I really like and that I can actually do in my own studio.
So Boglins are coming back. I mean, this is something that
Yeah.
oh man, everybody listening can't see what I'm seeing, but it's really cool.
So this is one of my new Boglins.
Oh
He's
man.
an imp. He's an imp. He's a teenage Boglin.
That explains the acne on him.
Right. Yes, he has very bad acne, and he's small, and it's like I've literally been working 3 months on developing this material, and it's like really nice, and
It looks just as gross as the originals, which is great.
it's
That's awesome. That is so
so
cool.
I'm going to be doing, this is the first of the imps, and I'm going to be doing a series of these, I hope, if it all works out.
Uh-huh.
So see.
With Boglins coming back, how do you reboot a toy? Like, what is that process? How much is nostalgia a driving force in that? And what does it take to bring something like that back to the masses?
Well, right now it's really small because I'm just doing, Maureen and I have just been developing this on our own. We've been pitching it to the major toy companies. Who knows if somebody will pick it up or not? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But, it may go that way. But if not, it's like Maureen and I have decided, we have so many people asking us for them that we're going to pursue it. We're going to keep pushing it and see where it goes. It's like whether a major picks it up or we ended up doing it on our own, as a Kickstarter or something like that. That may be the way it ends up. But
You're reading from my cheat sheet here, Tim, because one of the things I do a lot is work with people on Kickstarter projects, because I've had a fair number of successes on those. So I was just about to say, have you thought about Kickstarter and letting people kind of help you get your dream a reality?
yes, I have.
That's awesome.
And these are the new little finger puppets that I've been working on, because we launched with Clutter, the zombie mini Boglins, and we were doing them out of a hard rubber resin, and I was like, why did we do mini Boglins out of hard rubber, because they were launched in Europe, they were never launched in the US. I said, when we could be doing them out of soft rubber. So once I found this soft rubber, I started working on these new finger puppets, which are a lot of fun, and I'm calling them mini Boglin Wrigglers. So,
oh, cool, yeah.
So I'll be bringing those out too. So I'm doing a show. I'm doing London, UK ToyCon. The end of April, I'm going to be launching the imps there and the new Wrigglers, and then in the middle of May, I will be at the 5 Points Festival in New York City, and I'll have those two products there, as well as a lot of the custom Boglins that we've been doing with Clutter and other groups like Inkfusion. We just did a whole Inkfusion is a collective of tattoo artists, and at Horror Hound in Cincinnati 2 weeks ago, we had a whole bunch of exclusive, one-of-a-kind Boglins painted by the tattoo artists, and it was wonderful to see what other artists were, doing with them. So
very cool.
I'm letting Boglins go out into the world and expand, you know, and
it seems very organically too.
Yeah, and great things are coming out of it. So, you know.
So we're obviously living in a very different world than the 80s and the 90s in terms of where, you know, retail toys sit. I mean, shelves are disappearing in Walmarts. Toys R Us's are like a fraction of what they used to be in the heyday.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of direct sales to consumers through websites now. What is, I mean, let's not even forget to talk about the emergence of video games as like one of the most, you know, revenue generating industries out there. What is the role of toys today, and how do we get kids to play again?
Well, one of the reasons that I started working on Boglins again was because so many people who had them as kids said to me, you know, there's nothing out there for my kids to play with that it was as much fun as, you know, Boglins was. And why aren't you bringing them out again? I said, okay, you know, it's like, I'll work on it. You know, it's like, it was more people coming to us, you know, saying, you know, why aren't they back out there, you know, than the other way around. As far as I was concerned, okay, it was something in the past, but really, you know, being on the internet and getting feedback from so many people asking for them was a big driving factor. And, you know, it's been really fun. I have to say, it's like we started by launching them with Clutter, and I did a resin Boglin for Clutter, and we did the mini zombie Boglins as a new line in addition to the minis. Now, most people in the US don't know about the mini market, but I mean, in Europe, there were over 100 characters designed of mini Boglins. So we're going to be bringing some of the original ones back, as well as new product. You know, it's like, so I'm just going to keep letting it grow on its own, and we'll see where it goes. You know, it's like, who knows?
Now, you were able to retain the rights to Boglins. What about Sectaurs? Is that yours still?
Yes, and we are working with a company on a relaunch of Sectaurs also. That won't be till the third quarter of this year.
Wow, some very cool stuff happening. I got a really big question for you, though.
Yeah.
How do you approach something when it comes to in terms of design that makes it stand the test of time? How do you design something that's iconic and, you know, has that instant recognizable love factor when people see it and they want to touch it and they want to interact with it? How do you do that?
Well, it has to fascinate me first, you know. And if it doesn't fascinate me first, then it's not going to go anywhere. So, you know, it's like a few years ago, my son had just graduated from theater school, and he said, "Dad, you know, I really would like to do a traveling puppet show." He said, "I will write the script, I will produce, you know, and direct it, and we'll hire a bunch of people as puppeteers. Would you help me train them? And would you design and build the puppets?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, fine, you know, I'll do it." So, and part of that was there were characters in the show called Doy Birds, and part of the play is that this little girl is, or the princess in the play, has an astronomical cell phone bill, and her father, the king, is complaining to her about it, and she ends up taking these Doy Birds and making them into pets. And they were a simple rod and glove puppet. And the princess sells the Doy Birds as pets in order to pay for her cell phone bill. And my son had one idea of what the Doy Birds were, and I said, "No, I have a really good idea of how they should work." And it's just a simple glove and rod puppet. And people went crazy over them. You know, it's like we did the show. At the end of the show, we had some for sale. And we made more money selling the Doy Birds after the show than we made making the show.
Sounds
You
like
know,
cartoons in the 80s. More money selling the action figures than the TV for syndication.
right, exactly. So, like I did the Horror Hound show, and I was selling the custom mini Boglin, custom Boglins, and I said to the guy, the producer, I said, "Do you think I should bring these Doybird hand puppets?" I said, "Are there going to be a lot of kids there, or is it mostly adults?" He said, "No, there's a fair amount of kids who come through with their parents." Now, I mean, it's amazing how things have changed, because like I don't think when I was 6 years old I would be watching horror movies, but kids I guess have a different appeal, or like I'm always fascinated when I meet kids who have watched Dark Crystal since they were really young, because my own children would go screaming out of the living room rather than watch Dark Crystal when they were little.
But that's what's appealing to it, right? Like you said about, the Sectaurs. If it's creepy and grotesque, then it will draw kids in. If there's a sense of control, we'll watch it.
Yes, but for really young kids.
I was hooked just like everyone else. Dark Crystal. I mean, I was born in '81, so I saw Dark Crystal when it hit VHS the first time, and like Return to Oz, and all these dark '80s fantasy films that had some really scary stuff.
So, how old do you think you were when you saw it?
I was probably 4, probably 85 or so.
And you didn't freak out?
No, I mean, I just loved all that stuff. I was too fascinated by other things like the Mystics and Agra and like Jen tumbling down the hill and. Some of the slapstick fun elements, No,
my kids got to the Emperor crumbling, the Skeksis Emperor crumbling. That was it. They were out of the room. So I don't think they saw it till they were probably 11 or 12 or something.
Fear is good. I've always maintained that when you're doing kids stuff, there has to be some element of scariness. Maybe not frightening, like, villains turning to dust and crumbling before people in a funeral procession, but, there has to be an element of fear.
So I was doing the Horror Hound show, and every once in a while I would just take one of the Doybirds, and if, like there were little kids who were going through, I would just start playing with it on the tabletop, and, they would like look at me, and look at the Doybird, and they were trying to figure out how it worked, because, from working it from behind the table, they weren't really sure how this thing was moving. And they would literally just like grab their parents' hand and point and then walk over. And then people would look, were looking at what I was doing and stuff. And they said, "Oh, that's really cute, blah, blah, blah." And then they would look at the little banner I had to the side of my table. And they said, "Boglins?" I said, "Yes, I'm one of the creators of Boglins and Sectaurs." And they said, "You worked on the Dark Crystal?" I said, "Yeah." And they said, "You worked on Fraggle Rock?" I said, "Yeah." And they were, "Okay, how much are your puppets?" It's like, and I ended up selling, I can't even remember how many of the Doybird puppets. It was really fascinating. And, it's like, and then one little girl would be walking around with the Doybird puppet, and then other people would come and ask me, for the puppet. So it was great.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it sounds like you've got a really packed year ahead, and anybody that grew up in the 80s and 90s like myself is really looking forward to everything that you've got coming out, whether it's direct to us or you get, a company that you want to partner up with and we get to access it that way. It sounds very, very exciting, and I definitely want to thank you for your time. We've been trying to work this out since December when I was going through a ton of personal stuff and sent you my dental bill, and you're like, $500 for a night guard.
Is it that long?
Yeah. Hot tip, go to CVS and spend $30. That's what happens when you move out of a house and your marriage comes to an end and you're trying to sort your life out. But this is all good. I've really enjoyed this talk, and I mean, I have a list of 500 other questions, so maybe I'll hit you up down the road when kind of things keep rolling out, and we can kind of go from there.
Okay, sure.
Where's the best location people can kind of keep up to date with you? Is there a Facebook page or Instagram? Where would you like to send people?
I'm on Facebook. It's just Timothy Clarke, and then I'm on Instagram. It's Tim Clarke Toys, and I'm on Tumblr. It's Tim Clarke Toys. And my website for buying, Boglins, the new Boglins stuff, and for other things that I've done, like the Doybirds and totems, is www.totems.com, but it's not spelled like totem pole. It's TOTIMS, like my name.
Two Tims.
So, two Tims. Right.
Right. Cool.
And that's me.
Well, thanks so much again, Tim. This has been a real pleasure. I mean, I'm just smiling from ear to ear right now, as you can see, and as hopefully everybody else can hear that's listening right now. This has been great. I really appreciate it, man.
Sure.
Cool.
No problem. Thank you.
And there you have it, Mr. Tim Clarke. Clearly someone who's had an amazing indirect impact on my life as a professional, and someone who I hope to stay in contact with for years to come. For more interviews on folks that live their life in the trenches, check us out on iTunes and YouTube. I'm your host, Rob McCallum. Until next time, keep smiling and stay scary.